The Moors. The name conjures images of sweeping deserts, grand empires, and towering castles in southern Spain. But who were these people we call the Moors? Their influence on European history, particularly in Spain and Portugal, was profound. From the 8th century until the late 15th century, the Moors ruled over vast stretches of Iberia, leaving behind a cultural and architectural legacy that still captivates the world today. Let's start with some clarity. The term Moors wasn't used by the Moors themselves. Instead, it was a broad, sometimes vague, label applied by Europeans. It referred to Muslims from North Africa who had crossed the Mediterranean to settle in and ultimately control large parts of the Iberian Peninsula. This sweeping term encompassed a diverse population, including Berbers, Arabs, and others who came from different backgrounds and regions. Yet, over time, this term Moor has often been flattened into stereotypes that paint them either as exotic invaders or romanticized intellectuals. But the reality is far more intricate, complex, and fascinating. In this video, we're going to explore what scientists have revealed about the genetic origins of the Moors. Through the lens of modern genetics, we're uncovering secrets that even history couldn't fully reveal. This isn't just about historical narratives, but about tracing the DNA of a people who bridged continents, cultures, and faiths. And what we're finding shatters stereotypes. Far from being a monolithic group, the Moors were a blend of different genetic lineages, carrying the heritage of North Africa, the Middle East, and even Sub-Saharan Africa. So, as we dive into these 8 key discoveries, remember that this isn't just about ancient history. It's about the shared human story, one that crosses borders, defies easy categorization, and links the past to our present in ways we're still coming to understand. So, let's take a closer look at the genetic roots of the Moors and uncover what science is teaching us about one of history's most mysterious and misunderstood groups. When we think of the Moors, we often imagine a single group, all sharing the same origins. But science paints a much richer picture. Recent genetic studies revealed that the Moors were far from a homogeneous population. They were, in fact, a fascinating mosaic of various ancestries that blended over centuries. So, what does this mean exactly? Geneticists have discovered that the Moors carried DNA from a diverse set of backgrounds. Predominantly, they were a mix of Arab and Berber ancestries, but DNA studies also show traces of Sub-Saharan African and even European genetics. Think of it as a living tapestry, each thread representing a different lineage, woven together to form a complex and multidimensional society. One of the groundbreaking studies came from examining North African DNA, where scientists found genetic markers typical of the Arabian Peninsula mixed with markers unique to the Berber people, who were indigenous to North Africa. This genetic blend reflects the Arab expansion into North Africa in the 7th and 8th centuries, when waves of Arab migrants traveled westward, bringing with them their language, religion, and genes. Yet, the Berber people, with roots dating back thousands of years in North Africa, remained a core part of the Moorish genetic makeup. But the diversity doesn't stop there. Traces of Sub-Saharan African DNA are also present, likely due to the extensive trade routes that connected North Africa with regions south of the Sahara. These routes, which were active for centuries, not only facilitated the exchange of goods but also brought people from across Africa into North Africa, adding another layer to the genetic landscape. What's remarkable is how genetics has transformed our understanding of the Moors from a monolithic group into a genetically varied population. This diversity was not only the result of migration and conquest, but of constant cultural exchange and adaptation. Each genetic lineage within the Moors tells a story of travel, conflict, and collaboration, a blend of the old world meeting the new. The story of the Moors begins in part with the Arab conquests of North Africa. This was a time of incredible change, marked by the expansion of Islam and the spread of Arabic culture and language. In the early 7th century, as Islam spread from the Arabian Peninsula, Arab tribes moved westward, settling in North Africa and mixing with the indigenous Berber populations. But this wasn't simply a tale of conquest, it was one of interaction, intermarriage, and blending cultures. DNA evidence supports this narrative. Genetic studies show that the Moors carried markers that trace back to both Arabian and indigenous North African roots. This mix is seen in the DNA of North African populations today, revealing that the Arab influence wasn't just cultural or religious, but also biological. The migration brought with it a fusion of lineages, with Arab and Berber bloodlines merging over generations. One particularly interesting finding comes from Y-DNA analysis, which tracks paternal lineage. Many North African men carry the J1 haplogroup, which is common in the Arabian Peninsula. This suggests that Arab men intermarried with local Berber women, leaving a genetic signature that can still be traced today. But Berber ancestry, which has unique markers dating back thousands of years, is equally prominent, showing that the native populations maintained their identity even amidst this influx of new peoples. The genetic picture isn't just about Arab and Berber ancestry, it also reveals connections to regions further south. The Arab-Berber Moors were connected to a vast network that extended across the Sahara into the heart of Africa. This trade network, which brought gold, salt, and people northward, added yet another layer to their complex genetic profile. In short, the Arab conquests didn't erase the Berber identity but rather added to a rich and intricate heritage. This blending of peoples, cultures, and genes created a population that was as diverse in ancestry as it was in language and religion. Far from a single Arab identity, the Moors were a true reflection of North Africa, a land where different cultures and lineages came together to form something truly unique. Before the Arab conquests, there were the Berbers, the indigenous people of North Africa who had lived in the region for thousands of years. They are often considered the foundation of the Moorish population. And despite centuries of conquest and migration, the Berbers maintained a strong presence, both culturally and genetically, within the Moors. Berber ancestry is unique. Studies show that Berbers carry genetic markers that are distinct from those of the Arabs, suggesting a lineage that goes back tens of thousands of years. These markers reveal a population that was well established long before the first Arab tribes arrived in North Africa. In fact, Berber DNA has been found in ancient human remains dating back to prehistoric times, providing a direct link to the region's earliest inhabitants. Despite the waves of Arab migrants who entered North Africa, the Berbers didn't simply fade into history. They adapted, coexisted, and in many cases, intermarried with the newcomers. This fusion created the Moorish identity that would come to define North Africa and Moorish Spain. But Berber genes remain a significant part of the North African gene pool, showing that these indigenous people were not erased by the conquests, but became an integral part of the Moorish story. In southern Spain, where the Moors held sway for centuries, genetic evidence of Berber ancestry is still present in the population. This is a testament to the resilience and endurance of Berber heritage, which has been passed down through generations. The Berbers were not just participants in the Moorish story, they were central to it, carrying with them traditions, language, and culture that would influence the societies they helped shape. The Berbers' deep-rooted ancestry provides a fascinating chapter in the story of the Moors. Their legacy, preserved in DNA, tells us that the history of North Africa is one of survival, adaptation, and continuity. As the original inhabitants of this region, the Berbers remind us that the Moorish identity was built upon a foundation that reaches back to the very origins of human civilization in Africa. One of the most intriguing findings in the study of Moorish ancestry is the influence of Sub-Saharan African genes. This connection may come as a surprise to some, but the Sub-Saharan genetic component in the Moors is a powerful reminder of North Africa's role as a bridge between Africa and Europe. Through centuries of trade, conquest, and migration, the people of Sub-Saharan Africa made a lasting impact on the genetic makeup of the Moors, adding yet another layer to an already complex identity. The connection is largely due to the trans-Saharan trade routes, which for centuries connected North Africa with the kingdoms and empires of West Africa. These trade routes weren't just about goods, they brought people, ideas, and cultures together across vast distances. Caravans moved goods like gold, salt, and ivory across the Sahara, but along with these came the movement of people, including traders, scholars, and enslaved individuals, who settled in North African cities. Over time, this resulted in a blending of populations that left a genetic mark still visible in North African DNA today. Genetic studies show a noticeable Sub-Saharan African component in North African populations, particularly in Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. This component is also present in the DNA of some populations in southern Spain, where the Moors ruled for hundreds of years. In fact, in areas like Andalusia, certain genetic markers are traceable back to both North African and Sub-Saharan African ancestors, highlighting the deep connections that the Moors established across continents. This African connection enriched Moorish culture as well. The influence of Sub-Saharan Africa extended to the arts, music, and traditions of Moorish society, blending with Berber and Arab elements to create a distinct cultural identity. The Moors were, after all, a society open to exchange and influence, and their genetic makeup reflects that inclusiveness. What's particularly fascinating is how these discoveries challenge preconceived notions about the Moors. Far from being a purely Arab or Islamic identity, the Moors were a unique cultural and genetic blend. They embodied the connections between Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, a reminder that human history has always been interconnected. This sub-Saharan heritage is a vital part of the story, revealing a mosaic that is far richer and more diverse than the histories we once thought we knew. The story of the Moors isn't confined to North Africa, it lives on in Spain and Portugal, where Moorish rule spanned over 7 centuries. Though the Reconquista ended Moorish rule in 1492, their legacy didn't vanish with them. Today, genetic evidence shows that the people of southern Spain and Portugal carry a significant Moorish influence, preserved in their DNA. When geneticists examined the DNA of people in regions like Andalusia and the Algarve, they discovered clear signs of North African ancestry. This is particularly evident in areas that were under Moorish control for extended periods. Certain genetic markers, specific to North African populations, are found at higher frequencies in southern Iberia than in other parts of Europe. These markers reflect a historical blending that occurred over centuries of Moorish rule, where Arabs, Berbers, and even people of Sub-Saharan African descent intermarried with the local population. One of the most striking findings comes from the analysis of Y-DNA, which tracks paternal ancestry. Many men in southern Spain and Portugal carry Y-DNA haplogroups commonly found in North Africa. This suggests a paternal line that traces back to Moorish ancestors, likely from Berber or Arab men who settled in Iberia. Similarly, mitochondrial DNA, which tracks maternal lineage, shows that women from various backgrounds, local Iberian, North African, and even some Sub-Saharan, contributed to the gene pool during the Moorish period. The genetic legacy of the Moors in Spain and Portugal isn't just about numbers or statistics, it's about cultural continuity. Elements of Moorish art, architecture, and even language still resonate in Iberian culture today. And now, thanks to genetics, we know that this influence extends to the very DNA of the people. The genetic markers left by the Moors serve as a living reminder of a time when southern Iberia was a cultural melting pot, bridging Africa and Europe. In a way, the genetic legacy of the Moors challenges the traditional narrative of a reconquered Iberia. Rather than being erased, the Moorish presence was absorbed, becoming part of the foundation of modern Spain and Portugal. It's a testament to how cultures don't simply disappear, they transform, adapt, and become a part of something new. The story of the Moors continues to live on, etched in the genes of their descendants. One of the most fascinating aspects of genetic studies on the Moors is the way they reveal different ancestries through Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA analyses. These types of DNA allow scientists to trace the paternal and maternal lineages separately, providing a clearer picture of how populations mixed and evolved over time. Let's start with Y-DNA, which is passed down through the paternal line. Among men in North Africa and even parts of southern Europe, scientists have identified Y-DNA haplogroups that point directly to Arab and Berber origins. For example, the J1 haplogroup, commonly found in the Arabian Peninsula, appears in a significant percentage of North African men and even in some Spanish men. This suggests that Arab men who settled in North Africa and Iberia left a lasting genetic imprint that has persisted through generations. But it's not only the paternal line that shows this diversity. Mitochondrial DNA, which is inherited from mothers, also tells a rich story. In North Africa, mitochondrial DNA reveals a mix of lineages, including Indigenous Berber, European, and Sub-Saharan African origins. This diversity suggests a long history of intermarriage and interaction across cultures and regions. Even in Spain, mitochondrial DNA studies show traces of North African ancestry, particularly in southern regions like Andalusia. What's so compelling about these findings is how they show the different layers of the Moorish identity. The Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA findings reveal a society where Arab men likely mixed with Berber women, blending two ancestries into one. The presence of Sub-Saharan African mitochondrial DNA further adds to this mix, showing that the Moorish population was anything but isolated or monolithic. Instead, they were a true blend, shaped by the movement of peoples across vast distances. This layered genetic heritage is a reminder that history is often more complex than we imagine. The Moors were not just one thing, they were a collection of identities, ancestries, and stories woven together. The Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA findings help us see the many threads that made up the Moorish population, each one contributing to a unique tapestry of human heritage. The identity of the Moors has often been clouded by myths and stereotypes. For centuries, people have imagined the Moors as either exotic Arab conquerors or romanticized scholars and poets. But thanks to modern science, we now know that the reality was far more nuanced. The Moors were a complex, multi-ethnic group whose origins spanned different continents and cultures. Let's break down some of these common misconceptions and see what genetics tells us about who the Moors really were. One major misconception is that all Moors were Arabs. While Arabs did play a key role in the Moorish expansion into Iberia, the Moors themselves were primarily a mix of Berber, Arab, and Sub-Saharan African ancestry. Genetic studies show that the Berbers, who were indigenous to North Africa, made up a significant portion of the Moorish population. The Arab presence, while culturally influential, was only one part of this diverse genetic mix. Another myth is that the Moors were racially uniform. Some people envision the Moors as all being of Arab or African appearance. But genetic research reveals that the Moors' appearance and ancestry varied widely. They were a society shaped by migrations, intermarriages, and exchanges with other regions. From North African Berbers to Arabs from the Arabian Peninsula to individuals with Sub-Saharan African ancestry, the Moors defy simple labels. Their identity was more about shared religion and culture than any single racial or ethnic background. Lastly, some believe that the Moors left no lasting genetic legacy in Europe. This couldn't be further from the truth. The genetic markers they left behind in southern Spain and Portugal are a testament to centuries of coexistence and blending. This legacy lives on, not only in architecture, language, and cuisine, but also in the DNA of the people. In many ways, the misconceptions about the Moors say more about how history has been written than about the people themselves. By understanding the true diversity of the Moors, we get a clearer picture of a society that was open, multicultural, and dynamic. The Moors were a bridge between worlds, defying simplistic categories and reminding us of the shared, interconnected nature of human history. And thanks to genetics, we're finally beginning to understand them in all their complexity. As we come to the end of this journey through the genetic history of the Moors, it's clear that science is reshaping how we understand the past. The Moors were not just conquerors or scholars, they were a multi-layered, diverse population whose genetic legacy reflects centuries of movement, exchange, and adaptation. Through the lens of modern genetics, we're uncovering a rich and intricate past that traditional histories have often overlooked. These discoveries don't just add details to the story of the Moors. They challenge us to rethink what we know about identity, ancestry, and the interconnected nature of human civilization. The Moors were a people who bridged continents, faiths, and cultures. Their story reminds us that human history is rarely black and white. Instead, it's a tapestry woven from countless threads, each one adding depth and color to the story we call humanity.